Dr. Ahendra Pachauri.
Yes.
His son Ash Pachauri continues with the initiatives, and I'm part of the mentors, and it takes a long time. Sorry for that.
No, it's wonderful. And this is really one of the amazing things about this new technology, that you can switch from India to Ecuador to Toronto to.
Yes.
Well, thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very honored to be asked to chair this particular panel. And it's a panel that addresses an issue that I have found usually requires a preliminary explanation when we say that Nizami Ganjabi has ideas that are relevant to our world. And we know that it's almost 900 years, almost 1,000 years of difference. Where does that come from? Well, it comes because ultimately, whatever actions we all are taking, or other active leaders of the world are taking, they are driven by certain values. And we have all acquired an innate belief that issues of human morality, such as good and evil, right and wrong, justice and crime, have a common core that transcends political boundaries. And that core is, we now believe, really fundamental human rights. So if we look at this sort of entry point, it makes sense, because these kinds of issues have been looked at from ancient times, from millennia ago, and they are permanent parts of our human institution building, our human legal structures, our human interconnections between each other. But it so happens that in the last 50 to 70 years, most of the world, and certainly we, have come to recognize human rights as the fundamental benchmark against which every social organization, every law, every transaction can and should be measured. And even if there are certain minor variations or rifts that are allowed on some of these concepts, such as the socio-cultural definitions of what constitutes virtue and vice in societies over time. But there should be no excuse for transgressing the basic human rights of individuals, no matter what the circumstances. So today, globally, as much as nationally and locally, we are confronting major issues that, for the sake of clarity, I will limit to 5 fundamental goals that we are all seeking in the international arrangement, which has been struck in a very big way by the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, that showed that it did not recognize political boundaries, and that in fact our efforts to rebuild a post-COVID world are going to be driven by values, specifically since we have had not just the pandemic, but we've also had the 4 years of Mr. Trump, where he was pulling out of multilateralism, of rule of law, of all sorts of things. Now, the 5 objectives that I think we need to look at are peace, the promotion of peace. Second, freedom. Third, justice. Fourth, equality. And finally, sustainability, a way of life that ensures that the prosperity that we have will be available for our children, and the better world will also be there. Now, if we achieve peace, freedom, justice, equality, and sustainability, I submit, and I think experts in the field would agree, that Nizami has had much to say about each of these values. And if we are to achieve these goals, then we will have to deal with governance locally, nationally, internationally, and that governance must have certain basic characteristics, which today we would hold, such as democracy, and that in turn requires pluralism, participation, and the rule of law. And there are values that we also live by, such as fairness and values that we judge by, such as goodness, beauty, truth, etc. I can cite, and I'm sure many people here can cite particular passages from Nizami, from where he gives advice to his son, and tells him not to lie, to his views about women, to his conceptions about avoiding sycophancy to power, learning to avoid that, and learning to avoid greed. So if you look at these issues, you will see that the thinking of Nizami and the values of Nizami are pertinent as a general framework of the values that we bring to a discussion of the topics of what to do in the world today, in the world of today, in the 21st century, as the world is thinking hard about coming out of this pandemic and to do something different. And having said that, I would propose to turn over to President Vaira if you want to make an intervention at this point, and then I will call on different people, and then we can have a general discussion at the end. President Vaira, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, my dear co-chair, for this wonderful introduction. We started out this morning already with Nizami's heritage in a more direct way, and I think that the main conclusion from it was that for so great a poet and also a philosopher and moralist of such high aims and principles, he was just not sufficiently known in the world at large. The range of his admirers for a long time was limited to very small groups of scholars. Mercifully, his manuscripts and his Hamsa, his 5 major poems, were saved from the tooth of time and from the bookworms chewing up by continued copying and recopying of beautiful calligraphy by hand, illustrated by marvelous illustrations which became coveted by collectors of so-called Persian miniatures. But the ancient Persian language that Nizami wrote in became over the centuries less and less accessible, and so that many principles that you, Dr. Sarah Geldin, have been mentioning as fundamental principles that were, I would say, fairly novel in his day, although not unknown at all, but even in our day and age have constant forces fighting against them, or masses of people who do not respect them. He has one of the stories in the Haft Paikar is told by a princess about 2 heroes whose names are Bad and Good, and so that the fight between bad and good goes on. Nizami has a lot to say about it, not in a moralizing way, not in a preachifying way, not in a condemnatory way, but he shows what happens to bad people with the aid of providence, mind you, because he does believe in divine providence. He does it in an attractive, interesting, entertaining way. I think that translations, for instance, of the Haft Paikar could be even read by possibly last stages of high school, although there are some pretty explicit, even though very poetic, erotic passages. And in some puritanical countries, maybe they would say that they're too young in high school to read them, because he certainly wasn't a prude, and he has a very rich vocabulary, both for describing human desire and human passion. But one of the things that, apart from sort of good and bad as generally accepted moral values, my conviction is that Nizami was a mystic, and that the adventures of his heroes and their encounters with contrary and harmful forces are in many ways expressions of the human soul seeking for the divine. And I think that my suspicion is that he was either a Sufi mystic or a mystic of some other persuasion. Because, for instance, the story of the Indian princess in the Haft Paikar, of a man who suffers, desires, longs for something, comes to terrible conditions, is so relieved to escape the terrible conditions, but every next step of pleasure and delight and gifts that are given to him increasingly is not enough for him. So that what looked to him like the ultimate in pleasure and beauty and satisfaction all of a sudden pales, because there's one thing that he's still longing for and that he's told to wait. He will get it ultimately. To me, that sounds like a parable for the human's desire of getting this sort of if you like, heightened consciousness, a feeling of a contact with a higher power, with the spirit of the creative spirit of the universe, and that remains very much in different forms throughout his work. Not everybody would be interested in that, and he knows that, and this is why he has a surface level, which is very much fairy tale, very much adventure tale. He has an erotic level, which is again the sort of thing that we have a whole industry of books that play on that, and writers who live off it. He has adventures. He has explicit moral values, but he also has spiritual values, which personally, to me, are extremely attractive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that really, I'll just make one more comment on this. In his general writings, there are parts that deal with his orientation towards pluralism. And he does say that if you want to learn the wisdom, you open yourself up to all the other cultures and traditions. And he says he goes to the wine house. Well, the wine house here is symbolic. It's not really a bar where people drink. It's he knocks on the door and so on. And he says you'll find the wise people from the Jewish and the Christian and the Pahlavi and other traditions. And if you want to truly speak with them and learn, first you have, in our contemporary language, we say you have to destroy your ego. So he says you have to be like dust unto their feet, under their feet. Listen to what all these cultures have arrived at, and then maybe you will start acquiring wisdom and discussing, and you can discuss with these people. Now that's a principle which we badly need in the world today, because as we try to rebuild the world in this post-COVID situation, we are looking again to what we did after the Second World War with the UN and the pluralism and the international system, the openness to dialogue and cultures, which the new technologies enable us to do. And perhaps, President Rosalia, you would care to tell us a few words about dialogue, and especially since you were mentoring Pachauri Jr. So by all means, tell us how you see these values are well known. So go from these values to what you would see as fundamental things that we could imagine being new in trying to rebuild the world order after this horrible pandemic.
Thank you, Ismail and dear friends. I'm really happy to participate in this kind of roundtable through Zoom to talk about the legacy of Nizami Ganjavi. And it is such interesting that we are talking about a legacy of the poet that lives more than 1,000 years ago. It's so important. Then the legacy is validated by the time, and it's really a lesson that we must know. Vaira was talking about the passion of the books and the stories that Nizami wrote. But I think that he goes beyond. He goes to a level not only of passion, but love. And love moves humanity. And it's so important, the legacy of love that he can transmit. He was compared in certain time with Goethe. We all remember the passion of the young Werther. And of course, we think when we talk about the poems, the love and passionate poems of Nizami about this kind of sentiments, of feelings that goes beyond passion. But talking about the lessons that we can learn from the side of the writings of Nizami, going through this pandemic situation that we are living now, and personally, I was a little enthusiastic about that the world is going to learn a lot of lessons. At the beginning of the pandemic, when all of us, we were isolated in our homes without going, not even sometimes to buy things, trying to survive with what we had in our own homes, we feel that the nature was reviving, that the air was clean, that here in Quito, I can see the blue skies that I didn't saw in some times because of the contamination, because of the pollution. And we here to talk about the birds coming back, the snakes going through the roads and different kinds of animals. And we said at that time, we are learning a lesson, probably the same nature as giving this lesson. But when we see what's happening now, again, going back to the bad practices, to contaminating, to doing things against the others, to starting fights, to have a situation inside the countries. In Latin America, and we are feeling that. The waves of violence are growing. In Ecuador, we had violence this last week in prisons that we never imagined the amount of such cruel situations that we never experienced in the past. And we said, oh my God, we are not learning from the lessons of the past. Then I feel that now we have to put in common, and maybe it's one of the goals of Nizami Ganjavi International Center, to come alive with the wisdom of not only a poet, because I really think that poets are wise people, for sure. Poets, not even thinking in other goals like philosophy or things like that. Poets are wise people. I'm convinced about it. But not
the
only
true poet.
the true poets, of course, because you can find really bad ones. But he was a philosopher. He was a thinker. Then trying and giving back these lessons, his thoughts, it will be excellent for the world. Putting it together with the sustainable development goals, with the lessons from the pandemic of coronavirus, with what's happening in the world, with not this possibility of talking and really hearing the others, because people can talk but not hear the others, and that's a reality that we are experiencing in most of our countries. Then if we can take the thoughts of Nizami and put them into nowadays, what's happening, how we can put the philosophy of love, for example, again in a fashion, how we can put his thoughts, his philosophy to try to analyze the current situations. Maybe we can do better than only feeling what's happening now, and maybe we can go in a prospective way to go forward, because we need to go forward to a new world. I was really thinking with a lot of hope in this new world. I'm sorry that I'm not very positive today, maybe because we had bad experiences in my country in these last few days. and we are in the middle of an electoral process. But and we saw what's happening in the Amazon jungle and in other parts. But thinkers like Nizami and actors like Greta in Sweden, in Europe, or Neponte in the jungle of Ecuador. Neponte, that was considered one of the most influential persons in 2020 by Times Magazine. A small woman on the Ecuadorian Amazon is considered one of the most influential, Neponte. Then we can put Neponte and Greta and Nizami together and make a better world.
Indeed, they fit a description of a line that I like very much from Abraham Lincoln, which is the better angels of our nature. And I think these examples of Greta and others are the personification of the better angels of our nature, that are Malala and others are reminding us of what could be. May I turn to President Emil Constantinescu, because Emil, you've been doing a whole project about what the world post-COVID should look like. I've contributed just one part, but I don't have the overall picture, so please, the floor is yours. What do you see that we can rebuild in the world post-COVID? And I have then more political questions for Hikmat and Jumat Otabaya. But please, your overall view of what the post-COVID world would look like.
Thank you, Ismail. Indeed, we are working on the project focusing on rebuilding the world post-COVID. But now I would like to think from the perspective of Nizami Ganjavi and how the world would be like after the pandemic. It is both honor and a challenge to speak today of Nizami Ganjavi and join his personality with the current events. As a man passionate with legacy and history, I am sure that should Nizami Ganjavi have lived today, he would have been highly intrigued by what is happening around us. He would most likely have seen it is an intellectual challenge and would have certainly raised to it, appealing to the values that Ismail mentioned in the beginning: peace, freedom, justice, prosperity, all under the guidance of the mighty providence that Vaira just evoked. In 2021, the world is experiencing a strong change in perspective on account of the pandemic, which modified the way we felt about everything around us. In the words of the poet Nizami Ganjavi, 2021 is facing a pure fight between the good and the bad, leaving behind death and grief. The pandemic, which has not yet finished, raised in front of us a series of questions to which one can only have tentative answers. There are geopolitical and geostrategic shifts that need to be taken into consideration as countries and continents strive to adapt to the changes enacted by the pandemic. Its influence was immense, as it imposed a reorganization of power instruments in the form of a new resilience program to be implemented as soon as possible to try and curb the damage. The European Union was the most visible in that perspective, and others soon followed. But we must hold our enthusiasm. As in any crisis, the immediate solutions are not necessarily the best ones for the long term. When the pandemic took the center stage, it left everything we dealt with in the background. These issues, hunger, migration, poverty, social inequality, human insecurity, were augmented by the lack of involvement of governments as they struggled with the effect of COVID-19. There have been severe setbacks registered in the approaches towards sustainable development goals, but nevertheless the goals are all the more actual. In order to raise proper individuals, we need to educate them from an early age to provide food and comfort to them and bring them up in a secure environment. Today, when the world is torn between conflict and the disease, it is all the more difficult to do that. As a result, we need to join forces and struggle to reach a state in which humans come first and other interests second. It is hard, but not impossible. And I am sure that my fellow panelists agree with me, as in their position of head of state and government, they were also torn by this dilemma: how to protect the individual and not harm the state. What would have Nizami Ganjavi thought about our actions today? We need to do an exercise in imagination to foresee that. He would have probably used humanity as a general denominator for all our actions. And his most dear themes were peace, tolerance, and understanding among people. It is high time we learned from him. And should we have forgotten that humanity is what drives us in all our endeavors? The pandemic was a sharp reminder of it. Therefore, let us use this brief but poignant lesson in humanity of the past year and have humanity in the center stage of all our actions. As you mentioned, the institute I run in Bucharest is developing a project on the world post-COVID-19 pandemic, a humanist vision for a sustainable development. I will present it later in a Q&A later, and we'll briefly run you through our so far reach conclusions. Thank you.
Thank you, President Constantinescu, and Mr. Prime Minister Otobayev. The world is going through a major shakeup. For the first time, we have a situation where the performance of the East Asian countries has been incredibly better than the Western countries in dealing with this pandemic. The number of fatalities per 100,000 or million population is amazing. I mean, the West has multiples that go from 60 to 100 times more fatalities than the East. Some prevalent reviewers and thinkers, including my friend Kishore Mahbubani, for example, said when histories are written later in the 21st century, this will be seen as one of the inflection points where the tradition from the Second World War onwards was that most of the world followed the West. Now, for the first time, the West was scrambling around. Well, you could say, but the Western science did enormous achievements, but so did Russian science. We have to admit that the Sputnik 5 vaccine has now been vetted and reviewed at 91% efficacy, which is quite remarkable, and was one of the first to be declared, even though the clinical studies had not been completed. But do you see a change in the world order or a return? Because Mr. Biden said America is back, to which some commentators here in the United States, where I am, have said, but it's not clear that the rest of the world wants America back like it used to be. I mean, that may have changed by the 4 years of Mr. Trump, plus the pandemic, which was a disaster in America and so on. So what do you see as this world of the post-pandemic world? Mr. Prime Minister, please unmute yourself. Please unmute yourself. We can't hear you.
Okay.
That's good. Now we can hear you.
It's really pleasure to see good friends again, those on a very far from each other, but communication is very important between us. Of course, thank you for Nizami Ganjavi International Center and Turkic Academy to offer this very exciting conference to all of us to listen each other. And I also wanted to, before going to your questions, Ismail, I wanted to reflect on two things about Nizami Ganjavi timing, as well as about his experience, to look back to the history. On a historical point of view, when Nizami Ganjavi was born, it's already a century had passed since the invasion of Iran and Transcaucasia by Seljuks, Turkish Seljuks. And Seljuk sultans, being Turkomans themselves, having become sultans of Persia, did not subject Persia to Turkization, but on the contrary, Seljuks voluntarily became Persians and protected Iranian population from the raids of nomads and saved great Iranian culture from different tribes which were threatened Iran. So what it shows us that in the Middle Ages, we had rulers who was so wise, trying to protect unique culture by others, by other languages, other culture, just to demonstrate that civilization is moving ahead. So Nizami Ganjavi, of course, he was writing in Persian, like it was language of culture, wisdom, and science, and poetry. But he was living on a territory which was ruled by Seljuks. So we have to learn how our ancestors were dealing with different cultures, like protecting them, though they owning the political and military power. The second remark which I wanted to say is that actually Nizami Ganjavi, his main inspiration, his main teacher was great Ferdowsi. And Nizami many times cited the great Shahnameh poem of Ferdowsi, and even he created his most visible epics based on Ferdowsi book of Shahnameh. Even to his son, he said that you must read and remember by heart Shahnameh because it's the greatest poems ever written by human beings. What I would like to say is that actually Ferdowsi, he was live in two places along his life. First, he was live in Bukhara, the territory of current Uzbekistan, very good city, and later he lived in Ghazni on the territory of modern Afghanistan. So what it's all demonstrate to us that at that time in the Middle Ages, people in the greater Central Asia were so wise, so moving around without any borders, enhancing culture of each other, even they speak in different languages. So they were wise not to put borders and to put too much wars. They appreciated culture, science, education. And was not accident. During these years when Nizami Ganjavi was living and working, uh, his place was in the middle of Great Silk Road. That was a timing when Central Asia was the most richest and most prosperous part of the world because of the trade and business which Central Asia, greater Central Asia, were experiences. Nobody divided Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, Azerbaijan, or Turkey. So this was unified region which were very prosperous and very modern. So this is two conclusions which I wanted to make, two examples that we have to learn from the time in Middle Ages when rulers, politicians, thinkers, scientists made excellent decisions and were living in maybe even more harmonized world which we live today. Around the same time, Marco Polo, a little bit later than Nizami Ganjavi lifetime, moved from Italy to China through the Great Silk route. And he was very quick because there was no whatever, just you need to be wise to other people. Okay, this is kind of my history draw from my studies of the timing. And then Ismail, you said about what's happening now, why Asia is doing better than, let's say, West in many aspects. Actually, it's nothing strange about that. Actually, within last 20 centuries, when historians has relatively good memories of what happened in our world, uh, 18 centuries out of 20, Asia was dominating.
Yeah.
He disappeared suddenly. I think that he will come back.
Okay. Well, yes, I think the key point that he was making about the ability of people to move in a vast territory and armed only with their knowledge and their expertise, being welcomed in space after space, and interacting with others was an important feature of the Middle Ages. Although Nizami personally spent all his life in Ganja except for 1 year, but the fact remains that many such contacts took place. Both in the Abbasid period and in the Seljuk period. So that is true. And we were beginning to see a lot of travel and interaction between countries and peoples in the last 20 years or so. Global travel was reaching peaks that hadn't been seen before. But yet today, of course, the pandemic has created a new form of nationalism, vaccine nationalism. It has reaffirmed the difficulty of international travel, but we have these beautiful technological substitutes that we are having here. So let me, before I get to Hekmat Bey, because I have a specific question for you about changes in the Middle East involving from Iran to Russia and from Afghanistan to Morocco. We'll talk about that in a moment. May I turn to Professor Lale Javanshir? Professor Lale, you may, you have the floor. I would love, and I'm sure all of us would love to hear your views about the topic of Nizami and his relevance to our 21st century.
Thank you so much. Before I start my short talk about Nizami and his work and importance as a multilingual poet, I would like to thank the organizers of the event for inviting me to this virtual conference. Nizami is one of the famous poets and storytellers from Azerbaijan, and is generally accepted that he was born between 1141-45 in Ganja, Azerbaijan, and lived there his entire life. We know that most well-known poets had official posts at the court of rulers. However, Nizami never took an official post after his education and lived based on what he obtained from the poems he sent to statesmen. He was not a regular court poet and preferred a humble life rather than being near the rulers and notables. For this reason, he earned the respect of both people and poets as well as the rulers. He rarely traveled and is known to spend his entire life in Ganja in solitude. Nizami was a multi-dimensional poet who created unique works that elevated the romance narrative to a level that no poet before him had reached. He demonstrated a unique skill in developing aesthetics in expression and brilliance in style, which most probably has its root in his education, multilingualism, and exposure to different cultures and languages. As we know, he received a good education in Ganja, studied languages, literatures, astronomy, philosophy, geography, medicine, mathematics. He was interested in music and learned languages such as Syriac, Hebrew, Georgian, Persian, Arabic. So the multilingualism of Nizami is an important point in showing that the poet had opportunity to reach and read the sources of different languages. The answer to why no other poet gained a comparable success to that of Nizami should perhaps be sought in Nizami's in-depth knowledge of various cultures and languages. Perhaps his success lies in polyphonic voice of his soul and mind. When many countries struggle with discrimination against multilingualism, multiculturalism, Nizami's works actually provides a lesson to value the diversity and embrace our differences. He is known for composing love poems, however, subtle and thoughtful wisdom and advice are hidden in his poetry. He invites his audience to think and meditate on his verses and asks them to understand the secrets hidden in the words. Although romance, there are philosophical messages in Nizami's poems expressed through stories narrated using fluent and straightforward language, which helps to express heavy concepts in poetically sophisticated but precise manner. He was well versed in and skillful in using Persian language to compose poetry and poetic stories in Masnavi form. The influence of Nizami's work on poetry and literature is such that he is known as the leader of storytelling and literature. There are many annotated works and commentaries written on his work, especially on Leyla and Mejnun, another well-known romance, in Ottoman Turkish. And his work and the influence of his works on other poets who came after him is great. This influence is traceable in love poems and pieces on different themes belonging to the Masnavi genre. Nizami spent 30 to 35 years of his life to compose this collection of poems called Khamsa, or Five Treasures. So the collection includes large masnavis, namely Makhzanul Asrar, the treasure house of mysteries, Khosrow and Shirin, Leyla and Majnun, Haft Peker, or Seven Beauties. And there are music and ballet opera written about this in Azerbaijan. It's a very beautiful piece. And the other one is Iskandername. In addition to these 5 works, there is also a collection of poems called Divan, dedicated to this poem, and it's by him. Each of these works is among the most valuable contribution from Ganja to World Heritage. Of course, Nizami is a big ocean, and one can talk hours about him, but considering the time, I'll stop here, and thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you, Professor. I see Prime Minister Jumat is back with us. So, Mr. Prime Minister, if you will unmute yourself, please unmute, remove the mute, and you were cut abruptly, so please resume. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, sorry about that. Something happened.
Please, you're right.
So actually, Asia was. Yeah. Do you hear me?
Yes, we have. Yes. Yes, we hear.
Do you hear me?
We
Okay.
hear.
Just to make this quite quick. So fortunately, mankind collected a lot of data about current coronavirus crisis, and then this data must be analyzed very carefully, very thoroughly. So very soon, scientists, including artificial intelligence professionals, will give us the kind of preliminary analysis why some countries did better than others. Already in literature.
We're losing you.
More quantitative analysis why it happened. But all in all, we all must learn from each other, like people did during Nizami timing. It's bad connection. In short, we must all learn from each other. Lessons during coronavirus crisis.
Yes. I think we've lost again, but the key point that he was making, of course, is that which is one I also referred to when I referred to the story of the wine house and putting down your ego and be like dust.
I'm very sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm very sorry, Ismail, Dr. Ismail. But I concluding that this coronavirus crisis shows that our Earth is very small. We must not fight with each other. We must cooperate, learn from each other, and fight with a common enemy, not with each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister. I had been sort of promising my friend Hekmat Yatin that I would be coming to him with a serious question, and that question is really about the idea that one of the most problematic parts of dealing with tensions and wars and other things has been the so-called Middle East. I say this because it just shows the extent of Eurocentrism. I say to my friends in Europe, you have taken our history. You call the Middle Ages the Dark Ages when they were the glory of Islamic civilization. You refer to the Middle East and the Far East in relation to whom? Because, as I say, for the Australians, China is the near north. It is not the Far East. But it has been a very powerful, it's a manifestation of the power of the European culture generally in the last 400 years or so. But we come back to today, post-COVID, and whether or not this is the beginning of the Asian century, yes, history shows that Asia had dominated in a very large number of periods. But there is a suggestion that instead of having a confrontation between China and the United States, that we could copy the model of the European Security Conference and create a security conference for an expanded Middle East that would be where security would be guaranteed not just by the states that are there, but also by China, Russia, and the United States, and possibly the EU if the EU wants to play in that area, although how the EU, NATO, and the United States, who would represent whom in this is another question. The idea being that we need to reestablish this sense of peace and continuity and ability for countries to collaborate, cooperate, and specifically also to trade and to confront the likely aspects of climate change, but in a way that would be multipolar without the Cold War. So not replacing the Soviet Union with China in a US-China situation, but in fact bringing in the key players and trying to create a multipolar situation in a framework that would involve people, and in so doing, avoid the confrontation between the really super states, and at the same time give stability and prosperity for the smaller states. Now, in some ways, of course, that would also fit with the values of Nizami. But from your personal expertise, Hekmat Bey, in terms of the politics of that region and the politics of these big powers, do you think that moving in that direction makes sense, or should we better go back to the global structure of the UN and multilateralism and the way it is practiced in the last 70 years? Please unmute yourself. Unmute.
Thank you very much, Chairman. First of all, it was a wonderful event, I think, from today, this morning, and now. And it is my honor to participate and be able to see so many good friends after 1.5 years, maybe 2 years. Well, first of all, say a few words, because Nizami for sure was a poet of peace and kindness, but mainly basing his enlightened philosophy on knowledge, dialogue, and solidarity. He was a guiding light in his times, but I think are still relevant and inspiring today. The world also looking for this kind of values to achieve. Well, of course, there are many reasons to think and to claim that there will be a new Cold War. It is not the same one, but a different kind of Cold War. And new forms of cooperation also will become visible after the pandemic. For example, big powers like, as Ismail mentioned, like the US and China may continue and deepen the already existing rivalry between them. This is very clear when we listened, of course, President Biden during the Munich Security Conference was made it very clear. But not only that, of course, he wanted to have with the European Union, of course. So we do not know how long and how much European Union will be able to follow United States in every subject. But I think when you look at the EU very likely to witness new forms of cooperation, because first of all, the relation with the United States during the Trump, there was almost no relation between the United States and European Union. But we do not know how much European Union will be able to follow the American policy, for example, the relation with Russia concerned. Many countries in Europe still, they have many important relation with Russia, like Germany, of course, with energy projects. But the most significant issue related to post-COVID-19 world is about the fate of underdeveloped and less developed countries. Because if you look at the being more concrete to look at the situation, our ways of dealing with Africa, with Middle East, even with Latin American countries. That will be very important in the future. But one thing is important, I think, during the of course, pandemic, the education. Of course, I think many countries, maybe the whole country in the world, will have the pandemic generation in the future. Because look at many countries, they are not able to have an education. Face-to-face education is very uncertain in many countries. I think education will be very important in the future. The pandemic was revealed that there should not be a modus vivendi among giants. But what our need is global modus vivendi, which is comprehensive and inclusive. Otherwise, the global world will have very big problems in the future because, for example, for Europe, I think the migration will be very important in the future as well, because the poor countries in the world are getting poorer, and rich countries and rich people are getting richer. This is important and very true in many countries, inside the countries, and also very important if you look at the whole world. And we have seen that there is no justice, of course, as far as the vaccination is concerned. Many African countries and Middle East countries do not get enough vaccines to deal with the pandemic. I think the Middle East, it is very, very important to think of it. If we look at the history, of course, I think the Middle East did not have any peace and stability after the First World War, which is 100 years. If we look at past 100 years, we could not see real peace, stability, and cooperation in the Middle East. And I think the most after the pandemic, the division will be, I think, will occur between the people who have all produced sufficient technology, having democracy, human rights, and rule of law to meet their needs and require. But the other countries, the many countries, will not be able to have that. That will be another problem in the future, which we are going to face. Because now the Middle East, still many countries occupied or partly occupied by international forces. Look at Syria, Iraq, Libya, and Yemen, and partly Afghanistan, and so on. The other problem that we may face in the future now, we do not know what is the situation between Iran and United States, because the Americans saying that they go back to the peace or they had 5+1 between Iran and other countries. Now the situation is clear. American was renegotiation. Iran doesn't want to accept that. And I think the renegotiation will create problem because it is a pandemic box. When we open the box, we will not know what was going to happen in the future. That is very important for Middle East. If Iran is going to continue for nuclear power, I think the Saudi Arabia, we will look at it. And I don't know, maybe Turkey even will have to think about it. There will be another problem for the Middle East. For that reason, I think it will be important to see that the United States is going to join the 5 and 5+1 will continue in the future. The good things with Biden, of course, policy that they are back to, of course, climate change, which is very important for the future. I think that is another important thing that we are going to face. But the Middle East, I think, will continue to have a problem, and we'll still be able to look at the peace and stability. And of course, I think the big power should leave the country. Any foreign military forces should leave the Middle East, including my own country, including Turkey, to leave Libya, to leave Iraq, and to leave Syria, and to leave regional countries. I think they could come together and try to find a solution, because the foreign intervention never be able to resolve any problem in the Middle East. They always created more problem in the Middle East. Even not only the problems, of course, we see that they have the problem of unity, integration of the country. We have problem in Iraq still going on. We have problem in Syria. We still do not know what's going to happen. And Libya is another problem, and Yemen is another problem. I think, in my personal view, we should not accept any big power or any foreigner should come and try to find a solution in the Middle Eastern countries. I think the Middle Eastern countries should come together and try to find a solution without any military intervention in the Middle East. Thank you, Mr. Ismail.
Thank you. Well, wow, that's an interesting topic for a separate discussion, because I can see that there would be a lot of different views about how to do this. But effectively, we have lost this ability that existed at the time of Nizami for eminent people to move from country to country, meet with eminent scholars in the different countries and learn more from them. Nizami stayed in Ganja, but others would visit him. Bukhara has had great scholars. In fact, if you look throughout the Abbasid Empire from the beginning of the 9th century, you will see that there was an enormous outpouring of talent throughout that part of the world, either writing in Persian or in Arabic. But fundamentally, there was an enormous explosion of scholarship and openness, and bringing the decimal system from India, along with the zero, and impact on mathematics, impact on so many things, and talented people. People forget that Omar Khayyam he's known for the Rubaiyat, but he's also one of the greatest mathematicians and astronomers in history, and so on. So I think that, yes, this region would have a lot to offer, but whether just simply leaving them to their own devices would necessarily bring about the best outcome, that's a discussion for another day. May I now ask, I would like to go back to President Arteaga, but before I do that, Mr. Fuzuli, do you have something to add?
Well, I think we talk about different topics regarding Nizami, and one of the most interesting things that I listen is about how we can build this post-pandemic world. And Ismail make a suggestion about to create this new security conference, maybe trying to not to replicate the mistakes that we had with United Nations, especially.
That's not my proposal. It's a proposal that is on the table by other people, but yes. I thought it was worthy of discussion.
But you put in this table. You put on this table.
I brought it in. Yes.
Yes, it is true. It is true. Well, I think probably this idea can be grown up to try to build a new global order. because of course we all envision the risks that we have regards to the confrontation between China and US especially, but also with the actor that is Russia and other countries probably. But this multipolar world has to be cultured, because it's not easy to get. And of course, I am always concerned about the role of Latin America, because Brazil looks in the recently past like an emerging country, but the situation in Brazil is really not very good. I had very close contact with Brazil and several actors there, and I saw that it's a complicated horizon for Brazil. And Argentina, you look, the other big country is a disaster. And Mexico, it's not going well. The effect of the narco violence is going very fast through different countries, including mine, that was in the past out of this, being in the center of this narco violence, but now it is. Then we look a little concerned about, not a little, big concerns about the role of Latin America. And Latin America is in the backyard of the United States, as we always say, and you know exactly, Ismail, because of your role in the World Bank. We always complain about what happens between the relations in between United States and Latin America. And China is growing in being a big actor in Latin America. Not this last year, because I saw the statistics, and now China is not giving the amount of loans that in the past years was given to Latin America, but the influence of China is growing in Latin America, and it complicates the relation with the United States. Then we have to build this new global order, and which will be the role of Latin America, we will see. But we, the Latin Americans, have to work together probably to have this new role. And regarding what Professor Himelketain says, the minister, about the role of education, I'm convinced that we have to work really hard to hire the level that we had before the pandemic. That's it. Because UNESCO says that we are back 10 years at least during this pandemic situation, because of the exclusion of a lot of kids and teenagers, because they don't have all the tools to work on homeschooling or whatever, or distant school. And in countries, in not developed countries, it will be even worse than the 10 years going back. I constantly say, because it's one of the fields that I am working more often, is that we have to do something that we call in the ancient language of Inca Empire, a minga, a collective work. Putting the universities and the students from the highest level of universities like tutors of the small kids, because the teachers cannot handle with all the kids, and the public education is having a lot of pressure, because private is in a crisis because of economic situation in most of our countries. Then we need to be very creative about the tools, about reopen the schools, about this kind of mentors and tutors that could increase the level of closer feelings between the young students and the older students to do things together, or online or in presence. Then education is a big issue, and we have to work very hard on it. Regarding women, yesterday we had the International Day of Women, and we celebrated it with many forums and seminars, but the situation of women is even worse. I saw the statistics in the United States where women are losing jobs more faster than men, because the companies are leaving the women out of positions, and also because women sometimes prefer to stay at home looking to the small kids, because they have to connect and to be, and the moms have to be more present with them. And also the exclusion of women in school is really very high. Then these are my concerns, and we have to work together and find the ways, because we must find the ways to recover the time in education and to build, in the other hand, this new global order.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, I think education is a topic that perhaps President Vaira and Ravshan and the other colleagues, we should be going back to revisit. There is a major issue with education as the pandemic has spread in many countries. It has deprived many children of everything from school lunches to even attendance in many countries, and that's a major issue. Given our time, I would just like to do a quick tour of this wonderful panel. For everybody, if you have some particular insights that you'd like to bring forward to enrich this already enriched discussion. So with that, let me start with President Vaira. You have the floor if you want to add anything that after all this discussion that we've had.
First of all, many thanks to all the participants and the presenters. It's been a pleasure having you, and I hope that your wise words will be heard by others. Thanks to the internet now. I think there's much more streaming going on nowadays in place of direct contact, but hopefully it does contribute to spreading ideas. I think what we've been having as a core of our discussion is how can good ideas that are nearly 900 years old, how can we remind the world that there's still very much values that we need to ascribe to. But the sad thing about it is that, you see, you had good and bad fighting 900 years ago and 9,000 years ago, and you still have it fighting today. You have positive forces in the world, progressive forces. We have had the Enlightenment in Europe. We have had periods of enlightenment in the Islamic world much earlier than that. And at the same time, we have incredible barbarity, unimaginable cruelty, both in war and conflict zones, but in places like Central Africa, where precisely the richness in the subsoil, in everything, all the riches of the Mendeleev table are available there. The greed of both the criminal world and of international companies and of neighboring governments is what drives bloodshed, mutilation, constant instability, continued deep poverty and hunger. I spent 6 years with the Trust Fund for Victims of the International Criminal Court, and the details we received from the Democratic Republic of Congo and northern Uganda and that part of the world have not really changed all that much. The kidnappings of schoolgirls and even schoolboys in northern Nigeria for ransom, first of all, it seemed like it was like in Mahala's case, a statement, an ideological statement from extremists to prevent women from going to school at all. But now we see that it's become a business. Little boys are also being kidnapped in Nigeria and kept for ransom by their parents. The way women are treated in the northwestern parts of Pakistan, where government representatives actually, when asked about the international press about why is it that a woman is not allowed to go out on the street to pick up food from international aid from a family where all the men are dead and only women survive, but the local customs consider any woman that goes out of her doors of her house as an impure and debased woman who can be attacked and killed, the local authorities answer by saying, oh, well, we can't do anything about it. They have their tribal customs and we can't help it. With these sorts of attitudes still, talk about the dark ages from whatever region of the world. We have not come out of the dark ages in a great many parts of the world, including the slums of the greatest cities of the most developed, economically developed countries in the world. These are hells on earth, some of them. They are appalling where some children are growing up. So that I think that we cannot hope to make statements of desiderata alone. I think that this is where the statements that we make have to be linked to what governments and those who have power can do. I'm also currently with the UNESCO group about the futures of education. Education internationally, as is health, by the way, and for the pandemic, is under the responsibility of governments. So that a great deal has to be done. Number one, groups like us in formulating ideals, principles, aims and goals to be achieved, but a big job of reaching out to populations, including young children and through education, but reaching out and knowing that ultimately those with power, both economic and political, are the ones who are going to be turning the wheels of history.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for this very important reminder. And to me, this has both President Arteaga and President Beke Freiberger have really underlined the importance of looking at education. And Rovshan, maybe we can plan a separate event because it is extremely important, both in the attitudes of the future generations, but also because we have to think seriously about the transformation of education and the gaps that have emerged and the gender inequalities and other things of that nature. May I turn now to President Constantinescu? We have only a few minutes left, so just 1 minute or 30 seconds, whatever you have that you would like to add, President Emil.
I have seen Ismail and Himmet discussing the shift in geopolitics, which is real and threatening if we do not act soon. This has been also one of the conclusions we reached during the project that Ismail mentioned in the beginning. It is an online platform which will be translated into a book on the world post-COVID-19 pandemic, a humanist vision for a sustainable development, to be published soon, and to which I invite you to all to contribute. We will provide the necessary information in that regard after the panel. Going back to our debate and to pressure of building a new global order, one that should bring conflict to resolution and help people everywhere enjoy decent and healthy lives, we need to join forces and act promptly, single state or organization and group of states. I participated recently in a video conference focusing on the European project and its future. And after listening to all of the invited speakers, my conclusion is that we are now facing a European Union torn between hope and anxiety. European Union, which is now in search overall, be it political, economic, spiritual, and all three united in a single entity. And this is valid for all countries. This is also the conclusion of an extensive study I wrote and which I will send to all of you in hope that it will generate further ideas and debate, which are highly welcomed for the new online platform to be launched soon by the Institute for Advanced Study in 11 Cultural Civilization. It is a platform dedicated to a thoroughly academic analysis of European Union between these two vectors, hope and anxiety, looking towards the future of this wonderful European future, but especially to the impact that it can still create globally. And maybe we can plan soon a conference in this regard and discuss the topics you mentioned so far, education and all the rest. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Emir. Professor Lala Javanshir, unmute yourself.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Talking about Nizami's diversity and how he valued multilingualism and diversity, I just would like to mention that academics and people in position of power should be very considerate and more considerate actually about their statements and how they analyze the history of the region. When we say the nomadic cultures who came from north into Iran, like they intended to destroy. No, they didn't. They didn't intend to destroy. And there was no like Iranian culture, great Iranian culture, without contribution of those nomadic cultures. Indeed, Seljukids, Timurids, and others ruled Iran for 1,000 years. And they established great architecture, contributed to literature, and they weren't deprived of art and culture. Indeed, they had. When we look at the carpets, they didn't have walls to write on it, of course, but they had carpets they could carry with them. And if we go to museums, talk to experts, we can read actually this carpets like a novel. Indeed, like in the Central Asia, we see that even in Kyrgyzstan, let's say in Azerbaijan, we have the Book of Dada Korkut, we have the story of Manas, which are the great contribution to human heritage, and they are coming from nomadic culture. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Mr. Prime Minister, would you, Jumart, would you have any last words, 30 seconds?
Yes, just very quick. We have to remember all good days of old Silk Road during Nizami Ganjavi timing, and we must restore somehow a new Silk Road. I wrote some articles about Eurasian Railway Revolution. Currently, every hour train goes from China to Europe these days. Every 2 hours, train from Europe travels back to China. It's moved through Eurasia, and we are very active Central Asia in this area, Kazakhstan mainly, but now we're building more roads and energy corridors from Afghanistan, from Central Asia to Afghanistan and to Pakistan. With this year, this railroad will be started. We built together with Caucasian countries Baku and Tbilisi Kars Railroad, which will be an extension of Great Silk Road. So we believe that very soon we will get some kind of revival of Old Silk Road. Always remember how excellent were timing of Old Silk Road when it was center of economic, political, and intellectual power. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hikmat, last words, 30 seconds, go ahead.
Last word, of course. Number one, of course, the things after pandemic will be new normal. This is not the old normal, will be new or normal. I want to underline again, I think there will be some lost generation because of education in many African countries and Middle East and others. This is very important. And gender equality, of course, the woman, not a loser, of course, during the pandemic. They've been mentioned before. I know many countries that they are now more unemployment women than men. It was already very small, but now it's getting bigger and bigger. These are very, very important. And some organization like G20 should be I think, should be restructured according to the future situation in the world. They cannot. No organization should be the same when we compare with the past, and they have to restructure for the future. And G20 is one of them. Thank you very much being with you.
Thank you. Now, dear friends, I think we've had a very rich discussion for the last 90 minutes, and it's beyond the possibility of me trying to summarize and pull all of these many rich insights together in a matter of 1 or 2 minutes maximum. But I would simply like to observe that the essential values of humanity that Nizami represented so well, to the point where his most important biography in Arabic, written by a great specialist, is called Nizami Ganjavi, the Poet of Virtue. That he was a man who valued what today we would loosely call virtues, brings values that need to be reasserted. And while people may, especially fans of realpolitik like Henry Kissinger and others, would say, you know, this is idealistic utopian stuff, let us remember that by far the most influential action that has been made, I think, collectively in the world and in the United Nations was the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It has permeated the thinking in practically every place in the world that you can go to. You will find opponents and critics and others coming back to the idea of human rights and so on. And at the time when Eleanor Roosevelt did what she did in nurturing the Universal Declaration, a lot of people said this is utopian stuff. Okay, you know, just words. What does it mean? It means a lot. And that's why 900 years later, we are still talking about the words of Nizami. On behalf of the Nizami Ganjavi International Center and the Technical Academy, I would like to thank you each and every one for your participation in this event. And I promise that we will think of additional things where we can get together around education and around the changing global order, the return to the sustainable development policies, and many other things that I think have made the NGIC a very special place. So welcome each and every one. Thank you each and every one. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you.